Hey, what's up everyone? Jamie here from CLA, and it is Monday, so it's time for another handful of motivation from people who are frankly much more wise, or is it wiser? Much wiser than me. It's Motivation Monday, and each week we try to prove that Mondays don't suck. They are an opportunity to start fresh and get more done, and we have lots of personal productivity, self-development, and everyday positivity videos and tips and tricks and all the things that you need to get your Monday off to a great start. This week, we are going to start off with our friend Thomas Frank. Once again, just like Steve Dotto, I feel like Thomas is a friend of ours, and he has some great advice for us about working from home. Once again, this is the thing that we're all struggling to deal with. If you're fortunate enough to still be working, you're probably doing it from home. And sometimes you sit down with the best of intentions and nothing gets done. So like Eddie Morra at the beginning of Limitless, you put in the time, you stay in the room, and yet the inspiration refuses to strike. Other times you just intend to jot something down and end up getting a ton of work done, almost by accident. But it's not actually an accident. You've just successfully tricked your brain into working. So in this video, Thomas Frank shares with us 3 ways you can successfully pull off this trick.
One of my favorite parts of my morning routine is the time I spend reading. Every single morning, I sit down in this office chair, I grab a book, and I read, accompanied by a few essential tools. A cup of freshly brewed coffee, a pen for marking up my book so I can take notes on what I read later, and perhaps most importantly, this little green notebook that sits near my feet. This is my distraction journal. Whenever something pops into my head and pulls my attention away from what I'm reading, I simply jot down a note about it in this journal so my brain can safely dismiss it without being worried about forgetting it.
But there's something odd about my distraction journal. In between the pages of little notes about distractions, buying a deck umbrella or checking in with my team about something, there are pages upon pages of notes about my most creative and most significant work. In fact, my most recent entry in this distraction journal has nearly 6 pages about a video that I'm working on, nearly outlining the entire thing. So this is a distraction journal. This is meant for jotting down quick little notes and then getting back to what I was doing, and yet I find myself using it to do real, serious, significant work, even when I don't intend to. Meanwhile, half the time I sit down at a computer with the intent to do some quote-unquote serious work, I find myself staring at a blinking cursor. I'm kind of like, if you've seen the movie Limitless, I'm kind of like Bradley Cooper's character Eddie Morra. I put in the time, I stay in the room, and yet nothing. Now, unlike Eddie, my solution to this problem is not taking a small translucent drug. Though while we're talking about Limitless, I do have to just take a second to admire the way the filmmakers use the change in color grading to illustrate the change in his mental state after taking NZT. That, from a filmmaking perspective, is just, it's great, but I digress. My solution here is not a drug, it's an idea. Creative work, or difficult, challenging work, is kind of like a non-Newtonian fluid. Now, if you've never heard this term before, you've probably at least seen one of these substances in the past. A non-Newtonian fluid acts just like a normal fluid most of the time, but when it's struck really quickly, its structure, its molecules, become very rigid, and the entire substance acts like a solid. So imagine if you had an entire bucket of this stuff and you wanted to submerge your hand into it. Well, you could do it very easily if you did it slowly, if you eased your hand in, maybe started with the fingertips first, but if you punched it, if you just slam your hand into it very quickly, the substance is going to tense up and it's going to be basically like punching a wall. It's not going to work. And this is exactly how I think of creative work as well. When you make these giant sweeping statements like Eddie Morra and Limitless, today's the day, I'm going to write the entire book today, you slam into the brick wall. The task you've set for yourself is so big, so intimidating that you just can't get into it. But ease into it, and you sometimes find yourself immersed in what psychologists call the flow state, a place where you're completely focused on your work. In this state, the act of creation is all-encompassing. It's fun, and you sometimes find yourself losing track of time until you come out of it. Now, getting into the flow state is not always easy, but it does seem like you can do it more consistently when you ease into your work. It's almost like you're tricking your brain into doing it. So for the rest of this video, I want to share 3 ideas that you can use to trick your brain into getting into the flow state. And the first one is very simple. Start incredibly small. Don't make these grand sweeping gestures that just make your work very intimidating. And the example I want to give here is actually about the book that I wrote a few years ago. So if you know anything about my work, you know that I've written a book called 10 Steps to Earning Awesome Grades. This book was actually not my first attempt to write a book. It was my second. My first attempt was a complete and utter failure, again, because I just intimidated myself and I never got started. And I made what I thought was a very big grand gesture that would force me to write the book. I literally bought a ticket to a conference down in Texas and flew down there. The conference was called Finish Up Weekend, and the entire point of that event was to get a bunch of creatives, a bunch of entrepreneurs into a room and have everyone pick one task and work as hard as possible for like 54 straight hours to get it done. So I showed up with the intent to write an entire book, thinking that being surrounded by all these people and having a grand intention would make me get the book done. But instead, I came out of that event with nothing to show for it. I remember staring at my word processor on my laptop, just unable to write anything that I was happy with. So for this book, I took a completely different approach. Number one, this was not even intended to be a book when I started it. This was gonna be like a 5,000 word max PDF, like a bonus download for people who join my email list over my website. And my approach to writing that PDF was to first create a big outline in Evernote that had 10 different sections and a bunch of little sub bullets beneath them. And then with my habit tracking app, I set a goal of writing 500 words per day. So every single day I would pick one of those sub bullets from that outline and sit down to write 500 words. And because that goal was so small, on a daily basis, just write 500 words about one tiny little topic from my outline, I wrote consistently. So consistently, in fact, that my 5,000 word PDF eventually ballooned into a 27,000 word book, which is now in print and an audiobook. So again, if you can start small, that will help you to put in effort consistently, and over time, those small little efforts will add up and you'll get something that is just as grand as you intended in the first place. All right, tactic number 2 is to assume that you are creating garbage, or at least allow yourself to create garbage. And this is another thing that really helped with the process of writing this book. When I sat down to write my 500 words per day, that was my only goal. Just write 500 words. They didn't have to be 500 beautifully edited words. They didn't have to all make it into the book. I just had to hit 500 words. And on some days, I really did not feel like writing. So I would spend, the first 200 or 300 words of that writing session writing about how I really didn't want to be there and I really didn't want to be doing that. But eventually I would build some momentum and I would usually get, at least 1 or 2 usable paragraphs out of that writing session. Finally, tactic number 3. Jot things down in non-ideal places. Do work in places that don't feel like they're made for work. And this brings us back to the distraction journal. This thing is not meant for intense writing. I don't use this, or at least I don't intend to use this, to outline full videos. And I definitely don't intend to outline full videos while I'm sitting in my reading chair trying to get some reading done in the morning. I also don't intend to outline full videos as I'm coming out of the shower or when I'm taking a voice note in the car. But nonetheless, full videos get outlined in all those places sometimes. And again, it's because I'm in a non-ideal place. I'm in the least intimidating place in the world. And I think that the environment, the setup, can be just as intimidating as the task you set for yourself and can be just as paralyzing. So do things like keeping sticky notepads around the house, or keep a note-taking app on your phone that you don't consider to be the final place where your writing is going to live. Or if you're not a writer, for whatever task you often find yourself paralyzed on, find a non-ideal way to do it in just little tiny bursts. And you're sometimes gonna find yourself working more than you intended because you've slipped into the flow state. So in summary, number 1, start incredibly small. Number 2, allow yourself to create work that might be garbage, because some of it is not going to be. And finally, number 3, do work in non-ideal places. Keep sticky notes around, keep voice recorders around, whatever you have to do. Don't always force yourself to do work in the place you have designated for work, because sometimes that place is a bit intimidating. And if you
Time management tends to be difficult. It doesn't matter where you are in life. Usually it's hard because in the beginning, you know nothing about time management. But as soon as you start mastering your habits, your routines change because some event in your life forced you to lose track of all your progress. That's why it's important to keep track of where and how we're using our time. With more on this, here's Mariana from Mariana's Study Corner with 7 time management tips for a balanced life.
Working long hours is one of the struggles of correct time management. Either because your job demands it or because you're achievement motivated, relying too much on work to fill up the majority of your schedule will probably harm other areas of your life in the long run. When you feel like your regular work hours need to be extended beyond your usual schedule, it's probably because you're not managing your focus levels correctly during the day. In a past video about Cal Newport's book Deep Focus, we've discussed the importance of learning how to enhance focus during work sessions before we start tackling other issues. Practicing deep work requires a moderate level of isolation, but it also requires that you give yourself a strict period of time to spend working. This creates a false urgency that, despite being hard to replicate in a non-urgent context, can be easily mimicked with calendar blocking techniques, alarms, or by sharing the accountability with a colleague or a family member. False urgency mechanisms will force you to do your best work in the shortest possible amount of time, and that will help you avoid the need to work long hours in a regular schedule. In a way, mastering short bursts of focused work during your working hours acts as a direct application of the Pareto principle, or the so-called 80-20 rule, which asserts that 80% of outcomes or outputs result from 20% of all causes or inputs for any given event. In business, the 80-20 rule is applied by identifying an entity's best assets and using them efficiently to create maximum value, and in your case, you should be identifying the type of work or tasks that produces 80% of your results and prioritize and improving that 20% margin. One way to do so is learning the 3 core principles of time management: schedule, focus, and reprioritizing. We've already talked about focus. Schedule should be an integral part of your daily routine and should have its own place in your calendar or task list. Yep, that means you should be scheduling when to schedule things in your calendar. It's the meta concept of making time in your day to make time in your day. But as accustomed as you may be to the act of organizing your work accordingly, reprioritizing is sometimes the most difficult part of your routine because it's very easy to fall into that loop of doing things the same way every day. Reprioritizing means you should look at a full range of tasks and projects to complete and distribute your time accordingly, by starting working right away on the tasks that produce the largest amount of results, and then you should reevaluate on a daily or weekly basis which tasks actually correspond to that 20% of your work. And that's because the level of variation can be immense depending on the type of work you actually do. In one day, tackling the foundations of a huge project can produce big results for your team, but your role in that project may not produce many results if you keep reaching milestones that require skills that you don't actually have. So what practical steps can you take to actively manage your time better? Revisiting the meta concept of scheduling when to schedule, you should save time in your calendar to get organized every single day. Make it a ritual to sit down with your planner or other organization tool and just look at the work you're currently involved in and checking those milestones. Use the Pomodoro technique to track short bursts of focused work. I've been using Forest since my first year of college because it's a great way to set a timer, block other apps in your phone, and have a visual tracker of your productivity. And it just looks really nice. The Pomodoro technique is a time management method that uses a timer to break down work into intervals, traditionally 25 minutes in length, separated by short breaks, which is a perfect way to practice efficient time management on a daily basis. Force yourself to make pauses and start thinking of them as productive work too, as long as they're controlled and fit your schedule accordingly. Once again, the Pomodoro technique incorporates this principle seamlessly by forcing you to make short pauses between bursts of 25 minutes of focused work. The trick here is having truly enjoyable breaks instead of scrolling through your phone without a purpose. Also, limit your workday to avoid working long hours and consequently blur the boundary between productive time and regular home routine. Although it will be impossible to fit everything into a strict schedule day after day, having a stricter schedule, at least by principle, and recording that in your calendar or planner, will at least allow you to have a daily end goal, which will motivate you to work harder to meet that timely deadline. So to wrap this up, the 80-20 rule can be used to create a false sense of urgency that increases productivity and induces correct time management skills. These rely on scheduling, focusing, and reprioritizing tasks, which you should do on a daily basis. To practice correct time management, it's important to make time in your day to organize your work, use the Pomodoro technique to track your focused work, and remembering to make pauses and limiting your working hours. Using these principles will make sure that you work correctly and productively, and will help you make more time that you can use to tackle new creative projects and manage new challenges that are currently arising. If you feel uncertain about what's next, a creative challenge or productivity class may offer some guidance and help you discover new topics and interests, and get you started on that side hustle that you can do at home and help reinforce your budget.
This global era of downtime has most of us living through a great opportunity to clean up your house or your apartment, get your papers organized and filed, but it's also a perfect time to not only catch up with your to-do list, but also catch up with people.
You know, another nice thing to do, especially in terms of catching up, it's oftentimes subtle, and depending on your personality style about how much you engage with other people, this is called catch up your communications with people. Who do you owe a thank you to? Who do you owe communication with to update them? That's all the best things in my life have actually come from relationships that I've had. Surprising, serendipitous stuff. But as a bit of an introvert, I actually am, I oftentimes have to work at making sure that I maintain my communications externally and that I nurture them and take advantage of that. So I highly recommend you think about what are just some emails to shoot off, simple little things, or come on, get some note cards and write a handwritten note. Those things are invaluable, as you probably know. So that's another little thing to do you might want to consider as a project, maybe to catch up on all of those communications with family, with friends, with network, professional associates, etc. Especially these days when everybody is kind of locked in and not available there, those kinds of things could have tremendous value, just in terms of keeping the network warm and not feeling so mechanical and that we're all so locked down, and out of touch with each other. So there's my 2-minute tip for turbulent times.
That's all for this week's Motivation Monday. If you have any questions about anything we've covered during a Motivation Monday video, or have any suggestions, comments, or questions, please leave us a comment below. Check out What the Tech Wednesday each week, right here on YouTube on Wednesdays. Please like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another Motivation Monday. Thanks for watching.